Water, earth, fire, air. The Avatar is the bridge between the human and spirit worlds, but also the most versatile and powerful bender on the planet in the world of Avatar. Throughout his journey, he and his friends managed to save the world more than once, and in my last two videos, Team Avatar took on and overcame two of the most titanic tasks in the Naruto world, winning the Chunin exams and completing the Sasuke retrieval mission. However, today, Team Avatar will face an even more daunting and challenging task than they have ever encountered before. Today, they take on one of the most infamous and powerful villain groups, not only in Naruto, but all of anime. That's right, in this video, we'll be matching Team Avatar up against the villainous force known as the Akatsuki. In other words, today we'll be exploring and breaking down Team Avatar versus the Akatsuki Gauntlet. In order to get a good idea for how our favorite team of benders would fare against arguably the most famous and, well, infamous villain group in anime, we need to first understand who will be on Team Avatar, what the exact scenario they'll be facing off against is, and where exactly they scale. To address the first question, Team Avatar in this video will consist of Aang, Katara, Toph, and Zuko. The reason for this is because we'll actually be pitting them up against each Akatsuki duo as they would have faced them in the series. For example, instead of Kakashi, Sakura, Naruto, and Chio facing off against Sasori and Deidara, our team of benders will take on the task instead. I think the four of them are good for this because they're assembled like an actual shinobi team would be. One powerful leader, two combat/tracking specialists, and a medic. Aang, Zuko, Toph, and Katara fill these roles perfectly, especially in the comics, which brings me to my next point. How does Team Avatar scale in the comics? In the previous two videos, I established the scaling of our characters based on the info we got in the main animated series. However, for those of you who don't know, there are several Avatar comics that mostly take place after the main series, specifically between 1 and 4 years after. So, in that time, they undoubtedly got stronger, right? Absolutely. Their bending in particular got magnitude stronger, with Aang being able to essentially fly using airbending and even lift an entire city out of the ground with earthbending without breaking a sweat while in the Avatar state. Speaking of which, Aang has become a fully realized Avatar in the comics, meaning he is now able to tap into and control the Avatar state at will. He's also able to use his bending in a wide variety of ways that we never get to see during the main series, such as using an air scooter to forcibly move Zuko around, and using earthbending to create a giant stone golem capable of going blow for blow with a powerful spirit called General Iron. So the versatility and his overall applicability of his bending has gone through the roof, but to be completely honest with you, we don't have any evidence that his bending AP has increased from the island level plus scaling he gets from Kyoshi moving an entire island. So, although it is more versatile and precise, we don't really have anything that makes it necessarily stronger per se. This is mostly what we see for the other members of the team as well. Katara is better with ice bending and even displays the ability to bend plants by bending the water in them. Toph's metal bending grows massively, even being able to hold up an entire iron mine by herself for an extended period of time, as well as manipulate metal freely, pulling it through the air and changing its shape and consistency at will. Her seismic sense is also far more potent, being able to sense vibrations underground despite wearing shoes, which she couldn't do before. As far as Zuko, he does get an AP increase as well as massive versatility and skill increases. The AP increase comes from him being able to use the multicolored flames like he learned from the dragons, and we know that those flames are supposed to be more powerful. And the skill and versatility increases come from just a variety of things. Not only is he able to manipulate fire in a much more versatile and specific way, he's also able to easily put out fires, fly with fire bending, and is far more proficient with his lightning redirection. So, essentially, the entire team has gotten far more skilled and versatile with their bending, and it's possible for some or all of them to have gotten some sort of slight boost in overall power. But what about their physical scaling? This is where, if you're rooting for Team Avatar, I might have some bad news for you. While their physical durability has grown in proportion to their bending, since we consistently see that a bender's AP and durability share some level of relativity, there's very little evidence that their physical speed has increased at all. In the first two videos, we got them easily to a floor of low-end lightning timer levels, or Mach 587, based on the fact that Zuko and Aang both react to and redirect lightning, and Katara and Toph scale to Zuko and physical combat speed. Since we actually see Zuko and Aang react to lightning after it's fired, with Zuko even outrunning Azula's lightning in real time, they're likely multiple times faster than that, but we left them at that level to make the previous two videos more interesting. If I had used their genuine scaling of closer to Mach 1000 to 1600, it wouldn't have been nearly as interesting of a topic of discussion because they would have just slammed everyone they faced with no difficulty at all, since those characters from the Chunin exams don't scale anywhere near that. And it looks like that's what we're gonna have to do as well. Look, the Akatsuki all scale between high lightning timer and relativistic speed tiers based on basically all of them being at, slightly below, or slightly above Kakashi, who is a high lightning timer. This would make them literally hundreds of times faster than Team Avatar if we go with Team Avatar being around Mach 1000 to 1600, since high lightning timer levels reach just below Mach 300,000, or right around 1/3 the speed of light. But if you want to scale Team Avatar to high-end lightning timer levels, which is what we're going to do for this video, you can just call it a high-end interpretation, since we do see them react to lightning. Now, the reason why we had them at low-end lightning timer levels is because they're all relative to Iroh, who reacted to and redirected a lightning bolt on its way down, but the return stroke is massively faster than that, with the downstroke being Mach 587 and the return stroke being at that just below 300,000 times the speed of sound. You can somewhat justify the idea that they could be high-end lightning timers based on the way that Iroh describes lightning bending though. He says that it's the act of taking positive and negative yin and yang and separating them, which makes them want to regain balance, resulting in them coming back together, and that creates lightning. What's interesting about this is that is exactly what happens with the negative and positive charges in lightning during the return stroke of a lightning bolt, because the doesn't achieve balance until it returns to the sky, right? But so based on this, you could easily argue that they should be high-end lightning timers, with both Zuko and Aang being able to react to a stronger Azula's lightning bending relatively easily. That said, I do believe this is a higher-end interpretation, but because of the way that the lightning bending is described, it is still a valid one. So that's what we'll be using here to make the video more interesting. I know that was a lot, but now that the groundwork is laid, we can jump into our first matchup. But first, if you are enjoying the video so far or have learned anything, feel free to drop a like and maybe even a sub. You know, unless you put the milk in before the cereal, then you can just leave and don't come back until you've gotten the help you needed. Also, make sure to watch all the way to the end because I do have another Avatar x Naruto video planned if this hits 700 likes and 400 comments. But you'll have to find out what that is later, because now it's time for Team Avatar to take on their first Akatsuki duo. Our story begins when Gaara is taken by Deidara. The Leaf Village is informed of what's happened, and Tsunade must assemble the best team to handle the job. So, after Team Avatar was able to successfully deal with the Sasuke retrieval mission in my last video, she turns back to them to deal with this issue. In order to help them with tracking, a ninja hound is sent as well to, track. En route to finding the artistic duo though, Team Avatar would be confronted by two of the most infamous and deadly villains in the entire series, Itachi and Kisame. Now in this scenario, Tsunade will only be sending one team, Team Avatar, instead of Team 7 and Team 10, because, well, it's more interesting this way. And now, as this is a continuation of my previous two videos, we'll be assuming that the team has existed in the Naruto world for a few years now. This means that they will have learned some basic knowledge of each duo, including this monstrous duo before them, but the Akatsuki will also have some intel on them. That said, how does the greatest Avatar of all time and his team do against these two monsters? It's important to note that these two before them would be the 30% clones sent in the original storyline, which would significantly nerf them in their overall abilities. However, it doesn't seem to actually nerf their physical scaling much at all, which makes sense because shadow clones aren't too far off from the original either. since we can safely scale both Itachi and Kisame to somewhere between high lightning timer and relativistic speeds with their scaling to KCM Naruto and 6th Gate Guy, respectively, the speed scaling of Team Avatar and these two monsters should be somewhat relative with the line of scaling that we established earlier. That said, if neither side has a massive physical advantage, what it comes down to is abilities. So, how do their abilities match up? Well, to be honest, Kisame is basically a non-factor here. Not having superior speed would make it very difficult for him to land a blow on any of our benders, and his entire arsenal outside of that would just be used against him. Imagine he summons a bunch of water or a massive wall of water sharks, only for Katara to turn it all to ice. The only viable option he has is landing strikes with Samehada, but there's just no way that that's happening. Well, unless Itachi is able to get Team Avatar in a genjutsu. Although we're giving Team Avatar the benefit of having lived in Naruto for a few years, which would likely give them a basic understanding of how to break genjutsu, Naruto also had a basic understanding of how to break genjutsu and still got caught and needed help to get out. So that's GG, right? Well, not exactly. You see, while I do believe that Itachi could land a genjutsu, he cannot access his Mangekyo Sharingan, as he told Naruto in the original storyline. So, it would just be a basic Sharingan genjutsu, and probably the finger point genjutsu, since they'd know not to look into his eyes. This is likely a single target genjutsu, as we have no evidence that it could snag multiple targets simultaneously. If he were able to tag Katara or Zuko, either of them firing off random attacks like Naruto would be a problem, but I have no reason to believe they wouldn't be able to just be broken out of the genjutsu or restrained by Toph or Aang temporarily if needed. Aang and Toph, however, are absolutely immune to this version of Itachi's genjutsu. For Toph, it's pretty simple. She's blind, so yeah, she's not getting hit with any of his genjutsu regardless. And with Aang, he has the Avatar state. Since the Avatar state is described as a defense mechanism and can activate automatically, I have no reason to believe that it wouldn't just activate if he's placed under genjutsu. Also, the way it works is by literal spirits from another plane of existence entering his mind and body, so that would 100% disrupt his chakra flow enough to break the genjutsu, and then Itachi and Kisame would be facing off against the strongest bender of all time in a super amped state. As discussed in my previous video, the Avatar state should grant Aang a Blitz tier speed amp, since he goes from being pressed by Ozai to being able to press Ozai back and just absolutely juggle him. This means that if Aang goes into the Avatar state, he would go from borderline light speed to multiple times light speed, making him a good deal faster than either of the Akatsuki members before him, and this would be a real problem for our 30% clones. So, long story short, Kisame's water would backfire badly, genjutsu would likely be a non-factor due to Itachi not having access to his Mangekyo abilities, and even things like Fire Style would be ineffective against a team with two characters who can bend fire at will. So, what's left? Shuriken? Toph can bend metal. She even tells Sokka in the comics that any metal that he can see around them, she can bend, giving her a metal bending range of 3 kilometers for human-sized objects, because that's how far humans can see human-sized objects. So, yeah, she would have no problem sensing and bending any metal objects that either of her enemies would be carrying on them, or anything in the vicinity. We actually see Toph and her students trap enemies in metal that they have more than once, and Toph herself is able to manipulate the shape, density, and texture of metallic objects at will. This would allow for her to take the potentially dozens or even hundreds of shuriken and kunai that Itachi and Kisame wield and literally encase them in a thick layer of metal, trapping them. Now, I'm not sure if you're getting the picture yet, but honestly, this is a pretty low diff fight for Team Avatar. They absolutely demolish the Monster Duo clones and move on to face their next challenge. After their absolute demolition job of the 30% clones, Team Avatar is led by their tracker Hound to a cave, with its entrance blocked by a massive boulder. In the original storyline, Team Kakashi and Team Guy had to use the button hook entry technique to access the cave, removing the seals and blasting through the boulder. However, I don't think Team Avatar would have that issue, for one reason. They have the strongest earthbender of all time on their team. Even with the barrier, I believe having Toph on the team would allow for Team Avatar to easily deal with this roadblock. Katara would turn the river to ice, allowing for the team to walk across to the boulder, and Toph would be able to see inside with her seismic sense. This would allow for her to tell that 2 Akatsuki members are in there, and that Gaara is unalived. Since they'd have no way to cancel the barrier, I believe that Toph and Aang would combine their bending to either decimate the boulder or even the cave itself. Regardless of how they do it, Team Avatar makes it through and finds themselves facing off against Sasori and Deidara. Now this is where it gets interesting. First of all, Aang would be pissed. He is not a fan of killing in general, and Deidara is literally sitting on Gaara's corpse, so I could see Aang immediately ordering Deidara to get off of him. Deidara would likely make a mocking comment like he did to Naruto, and take off on one of his birds to attempt to separate the team. Upon seeing his ability to fly, I believe the most likely 2 members of Team Avatar to go after him are the 2 who can fly, or somewhat fly, Aang and Zuko. Since Toph would want to stay close to the ground and Katara would literally have a massive body of water behind her to utilize, I see this as the best situation for the bending squad. Aang and Zuko versus Deidara, Katara and Toph versus Sasori. Can Team Avatar win this battle, or will they fall to the menacing duo before them? First, I'd like to point out that, again, there shouldn't be a massive discrepancy in physical scaling, so what this would come down to is how their abilities match up, and I gotta tell you, this might be worse than the previous matchup. Before diving into Katara and Toph versus Sasori, let's take a look at how Aang and Zuko would operate against Deidara. First of all, Deidara's aerial advantage is completely eliminated by Aang and Zuko being able to fly, and fire long-range techniques, where Naruto and Kakashi were at a disadvantage due to not being able to fly and only having one semi-viable long-range technique. Aang and Zuko excel in both of those areas, but how would they deal with Deidara's explosives? Gotta be honest with you, this is where Team Avatar crossverse scaling just isn't fair. Remind me, what exactly is clay? If you said earth, congratulations. Not only is clay a type of earth, his clay explosives are earth style. So in crossverse, it would literally be earth either way. I know this is such an anticlimactic way to do this, but Aang would literally, or should literally, be able to bend Deidara's clay as if it were any other type of earth, potentially trapping him within his own bird. But maybe you could argue that, like sand bending, you need to be an incredibly skilled earthbender, and Aang just isn't there. I wouldn't agree with that, but let's play devil's advocate for just a moment. You see, I have no doubt that Aang and Zuko would have zero issues dodging and or deflecting any of Deidara's clay attacks. Airbending would likely be all that's needed for that, to be honest, because we see Aang deflect fire, earth, water, all kinds of different things with just his airbending, so that should take care of that. But how does this battle go? Well, once Deidara takes to the skies, I see Aang and Zuko doing the same. If we're assuming that Deidara's clay can't be bent by Aang, which it probably could, he simply gets each attack deflected by airbending with very little issue, while Zuko is firing just massive fire blasts at him at the same time. Ultimately, it would likely be too much for Deidara to handle, especially with the small amount of clay that he had at the time. Considering the fact that bending attacks tend to be faster than the physical combat speed of benders, if we assume that some level of relativity between Deidara, Aang, and Zuko exists, their attacks should be fast enough to press him into making a mistake somewhere along the way. Even if you disagree with the idea that the benders' physical combat speed is slightly slower than their bending speed, they're at least somewhat relative, so it works either way. Once he's grounded, Deidara is at a massive disadvantage against Aang, who can just trap him in earthbending, eliminating his ability to utilize his clay bombs. Zuko and Aang win low to mid difficulty. But let's check back in with our other 2 benders. Gotta be real with you, this one is a slaughter fest, and I hate to say that because I like Sasori, but not only should Toph be able to sense that the real Sasori is inside of the Hiriko puppet, she'd also be able to bend every metal contraption he has in his puppets at will, including some of the key parts of all of the puppets that he has, the Hiriko puppet, his main body, the 100 puppets, etc. Even if he brings out his trump card, the 3rd Kazekage puppet, Remind me what the third was famous for. Oh, that's right. His iron sand. Considering the fact that, like we said before, Toph was able to hold up an entire collapsing iron mine by herself, I have no reason to believe anything except the fact that she would use that against Sasori as well. At the end of the day, everything in his arsenal would be turned against him. Now, I realize that he could use the poison fog, but he only does that in character after using the poison needles and weapons, and only from a certain distance. And just imagine him shooting hundreds of needles only for them to be stopped, like the bullets in the Matrix by Toph, and then just redirected back at him. I don't have any reason to believe that the fight would even get that far, nor do I believe that the fog would ever be close enough to them, because they're never going to need to get in the range of the fog. Even if he comes out of the Hiriko puppet, he's got blades and a giant metal cable in his main body that'll just be used against him as well. So eventually, his core will have to come out, and both Katara and Toph have a means of trapping the core either in earth or ice with no issues, and Toph has a means of tracking the core because, she has a seismic sense. Long story short, Sasori gets absolutely dog-walked here. So Team Avatar wins against this duo, gets Gaara's body back, and complete their mission with relatively low difficulty. Sometime later in the Naruto world, a new threat emerges. 2 more members of the Akatsuki are detected, and Tsunade sends a team to face off against them. But this ultimately results in Asuma's death. Grieved and angry, Shikamaru pleads with Tsunade to let him go after the monsters, but in this timeline, she says no, because in this timeline, she sends Team Avatar. Now, a Team Avatar's equivalent to Shikamaru's shadow possession plan out the gate would be just binding both Hidan and Kakuzu with earthbending, but that wouldn't work for the same reason that it didn't work against Shikamaru, Kakuzu's weird physiology. That said, the trick would likely only work once due to Toph's seismic sense and massively superior control over the earth in comparison to Kakuzu, but that might become important later. For now, Kakuzu was able to break both himself and Hidan free from the earth binding, leaving Team Avatar in a face-off with the Killers of Asuma, the zombie duo of Kakuzu and Hidan. But how does this battle play out? Well, there are a couple things that we know that would be very important here. First off, there still shouldn't be a massive scaling advantage either way, so nobody is getting blitzed here. Second, the immortal duo was separated in the original storyline because of Shikamaru's plan, but they actually prefer to stick together and do combo moves. I suppose you could say that Aang pops Hidan up on an air scooter and forces him away via the same way he forced Zuko to go where he wanted him to go in the comics, but I'm not sure that's even the strategy that would be taken here. You see, Team Avatar will split up if they need to, but they also like fighting as a team. So I see this becoming a true 2v4 instead of 2 2v1s. That said, how do these combatants stack up against one another? But let's just get the obvious out of the way. Hidan is an absolute non-factor. Not only is he likely the slower of the two, but he also has 0 ranged attacks at his disposal. Since Zuko is a master swordsman as well as arguably the best firebender in the world by the end of the Avatar comics, I think he would honestly take Hidan by himself. Zuko's relative speed, arguably superior sword skills, and ability to fight at range would give him a massive advantage over Hidan. Obviously, they'd have some level of intel on this guy being essentially unkillable, so Zuko would be able to go all out without worrying as well, especially if he has the ability to do combo attacks with the team. But what about Kakuzu? Well, here's the problem. The only ways that I see them even getting an understanding of the fact that he has 5 lives is either Toph sensing his hearts with the seismic sense, or the masks coming out to face them on their own. Since Team Avatar aren't known for their ruthless bloodthirstiness, I don't see them attempting to unalive Kakuzu and finding out the same way that the OG team did that he does need to be put down 5 times. However, if Zuko does just immediately go after Hidan because he's like, oh, this guy's got a sword, kind of, and I've got some swords, let's go, I don't see Kakuzu taking on all 3 of the remaining members of Team Avatar without splitting up his hearts. So they likely just end up thinking that they have to take down the weird masks coming out of him, even without realizing that they are his hearts. Now, I don't know, maybe Toph would realize it and they'd just spare the last one, but either way, they figure it out and have to take down the hearts to take down Kakuzu. But the question is, could they? Well, let's look at his arsenal. Water, earth, fire, wind, lightning, all 5 chakra natures. Is there any way that Team Avatar could deal with this type of arsenal? Yup, not only can Aang himself and Team Avatar collectively deal with the water, earth, fire, and wind styles, because water, earth, fire, air, both Aang and Zuko would easily deal with lightning style by redirecting it. This means that none of Kakuzu's ranged attacks are going to work, and that leaves him at a massive disadvantage. While his hand-to-hand skill is formidable, without the help of his hearts and Aang and Toph being able to continuously restrain him by attacking his feet with earthbending, he has a titanic task that I'm not sure he lives up to. I also think it's worth noting that the hearts themselves don't have great durability, so with Aang's AP being easily island level plus, and the rest of the team scaling easily to multiple city block level, as well as having the type advantages to deal critical blows, the hearts should be able to be dealt with pretty easily. So this leads to one of 2 things in my opinion. Either all of the hearts get taken down pretty quickly by the bending of our team of heroes, or 1 or 2 of them get taken down and then Kakuzu enters his fuse form. If he does enter the fuse form, I could see Aang entering his avatar state to counter, and this would lead to an elemental battle like we've never seen. But it would also lead to the massive amp on Aang's part that I believe would allow for him to gain the edge. With Hidan defeated quickly and the rest of the team at his back, Avatar Aang would proceed to show Kakuzu his elemental superiority, until he eventually overpowered the immortal man. It's at this point that Aang would use his earthbending to fully restrain Kakuzu once more, trapping him inside of a massive structure of earth. Kakuzu would attempt to move his hand through the ground to attack Aang from a blind spot, but the blind girl with no blind spots would stop it. She'd stomp her foot and trap the hand where it was underground. Kakuzu's physical abilities would allow for him to break free of any amount of earth that Aang can put on him, so I believe that Toph would come in to finish the restraint job, utilizing the ninja tools Kakuzu has on him, along with the now incapacitated Hidan's sword, or scythe, to bind Kakuzu fully. Not only would Team Avatar be able to defeat this duo, they'd be able to do it without being forced to end either of them, which is fitting for the immortal duo. Based on the fact that Hidan and Kakuzu unalived Asuma in cold blood, this could be a scenario in which Aang decides to use his energy bending to take away Kakuzu's ability to use chakra. But whether he does or not, Team Avatar wins mid-difficulty. A few months go by and Team Avatar is going on missions like everyone else in the village, until one day they're called into Tsunade's office and assigned the task of tracking down and taking out Itachi and Kisame. They get word from their spies that Itachi and Kisame would be at the old Uchiha hideout, so they gather their essentials and head out. Upon arrival, we see both Itachi and Kisame standing on the edge of the rooftop of the hideout. Aang readies his team, and he and Zuko propel themselves with their bending and begin flying upwards towards the enemies. Simultaneously, Kisame hops down to face Katara and Toph. Itachi versus Aang and Zuko, Kisame versus Katara and Toph. Now that the monster duo is at full power, how does this fight go in comparison to the first round? Well, in order to talk about how this would go differently, we need to discuss what exactly is, well, different. The physical scaling shouldn't change much, if at all, so that's pretty easy. However, now that Itachi and Kisame have access to their full chakra reserves, they both get massive amps to their arsenals. Kisame gets access to much larger amounts of water, as well as increased stamina and AP. But just like in the last matchup, any amount of water that he produces can and will be used against him. However, Itachi is a very different story. Now that Itachi is at full power, he gains access to his Mangekyo Sharingan abilities, namely Tsukiyomi, Amaterasu, and the Susanoo. Obviously, Itachi's Susanoo comes standard with the Totsuka Blade and the Yatamir spirit weapons. Now, this absolutely changes the game, but before we dig into how he would perform against Team Avatar, let's first discuss how the matchup with Kisame would go. Honestly, it's probably more of the same. Maybe you could argue that Kisame can create more water than Katara could bend, but Iroh calls Katara the strongest bender of the age outside of Avatar Aang, so I'm not sure about that. Even if you do argue that, none of his actual water attacks should be enough to overcome her bending, in my opinion. When you add in the fact that Toph would be able to use the metal he carries on him, such as his headband, to throw him off or even wound him, Kisame is going to have a really hard time. I do think that he lasts a bit longer than before, but I don't see him being able to escape the power of Katara's superior water manipulation. Eventually, he's going to be caught by Katara's ice or one of her water attacks and frozen in place. I will say, Toph might not really have to do much here because of the fact that the entire battlefield will be flooded with water, and I'm not going to assume that they all learn to walk on water just because they're existing in the Naruto world. Although I do believe that's probably the case, I want to keep this as close to the canon material as possible. So, Toph probably would run up the outer wall of the Uchiha hideout. That's right, she can run up walls with earthbending, pretty cool, and either fire earthbending blasts at him from afar, attack the metal he's wearing, or go help Zuko and Aang. At the end of the day, though, Kisame's lack of versatility and dependability on his water style would be his downfall against the world's greatest water bender. But what about Itachi? How would he fare? Honestly, I believe he'd be doing way better than his shark-skinned teammate. Although Aang and Zuko would have the aerial advantage, Itachi certainly has the intellect advantage, and that would come in handy. He also has the Susanoo, which neither Zuko nor Aang would be able to break through. So, how do I see this going? Well, since we're talking about this in chronological order, Itachi would know that Aang wouldn't be able to get taken down with basic genjutsu, but knowing Itachi, he may go ahead and try out the stronger genjutsu, the Tsukiyomi. The question is, would it work? We know that the real danger of Tsukiyomi isn't necessarily the power or control, but rather the time. Yes, it is powerful, and yes, it does immobilize the opponent, but the real threat is the amount of time it takes for the jutsu to happen in real time versus in the illusion world. Itachi is capable of launching a Tsukiyomi that lasts a picosecond in real life, while lasting over 80 years in the dream realm. So, although I do believe that this could unalive Aang, the questions we have to ask ourselves are A, would it land, and B, would the avatar state be enough to break him out? Let's discuss the first question. Well, first, would the Tsukiyomi land? I'd say maybe not. We know that all of Team Avatar would know not to look into Itachi's eyes, and the Tsukiyomi requires eye contact, so that takes care of that. But that leaves a major problem. How will they fight Itachi without being able to look at him? They're not Guy, they don't have the look at the feet technique down. So for Zuko, he's kind of SOL, but Aang does have an interesting counter to this: seismic sense. So what I could see is Aang telling Zuko to stay back and just provide support from a distance while Aang fights Itachi himself. His seismic sense would allow for him to track Itachi even with his eyes closed, and we know that Itachi would likely figure it out eventually, but it would aid Aang early in the fight. However, like I just alluded to, at some point Aang would likely have to open his eyes. Which leads me to number 2. Would the Avatar state break Aang out of Tsukiyomi? The answer is maybe? So here's the problem. We know from the Kyoshi novel that time works differently in the spirit world, which is where the previous avatars and Rava reside. This means that it's entirely possible that they could break him out in time. However, a picosecond is a minuscule amount of time, and the time dilation in the spirit world has never been shown to be that drastic. So I'm going to lean in the direction of the Tsukiyomi being a legitimate win condition if Itachi can get it to land. But if Aang is able to, with long-range assistance from Zuko, fight Itachi with his eyes closed using seismic sense, would he have any other win conditions in his kit? I'm sure that we can all agree that Fire Style isn't working for obvious reasons, and Clone Feints won't really matter if we have Aang using his seismic sense. Shuriken and Kunai won't be a problem due to Aang being able to, deflect them with airbending, as he's the greatest airbender of all time. So, what else does Itachi have at his disposal? Well, for one, he has Amaterasu, which might not even work. You see, Amaterasu is described as the highest form of fire style. This means it's literally fire, which means that it's possible that Zuko and or Aang would be able to bend it. I'd be hard-pressed to say that Zuko could just put it out like he does with other fire in the comics, but moving it away shouldn't be a problem. So, Amaterasu is likely out. So Fire Style, Amaterasu, clones, ninja tools, and basic genjutsu are out of the question. But what about Itachi's Susanoo abilities, Yasaka Magatama and the Totsuka Blade? Gotta be real with you, Yasaka Magatama scales absolutely nowhere, so we don't really know. I mean, we don't have an actual concrete scaling for it, so I think it's probably fair to say it's 50-50, meaning we can't really use it as a win con. However, the Totsuka Blade is interesting. Now, Aang would 100% be able to see the spirit weapon since he can literally see spirits. Some people theorize it's like the Reaper where you can't see it until you're pierced by it. I don't ascribe to this, but it's worth mentioning. But would Aang be able to counter it? The answer is, I don't know. We also have no legitimate speed scaling on this thing, so it's impossible to say whether or not it would be able to blitz Aang, but the really interesting thing to ask ourselves is, could Aang bend it? You see, Aang is an energy bender, so you could make an argument that since the energy he's bending is chi in its purest form, there's a possibility that he could bend spiritual energy in Naruto. I will say though, that feels like a bit of a stretch for me, so what do we do with all these unknowns? Let me just start by saying this. I believe that the Tsukuyomi hitting Aang before he activates the Avatar state would work, but after the Avatar state is activated, it shouldn't. Since he's getting a steady influx of power from another dimension, I think that it should counter it. As far as the Totsuka Blade, I'll just say it probably can't be bent, but it probably can be dodged, so it'll be a valid win condition if it lands. And of course, Team Avatar has their own win conditions of restraining or knocking out Itachi, assuming that they're able to get to him. But enough of how their abilities work against each other. How does this battle actually go down? While Katara and Kisame are clashing in a battle of arguably the greatest water users in their respective universes, Toph is mounted on the side of the Uchiha hideout, firing boulders at Kisame from afar and irritating him by manipulating his headband and all the kunai he has. Simultaneously, Aang is in a face-off against Itachi with Zuko in the back providing support. Eyes closed, Aang senses Itachi, and they exchange elemental blasts from afar before Itachi attempts to press Aang. Aang would be able to hold his own in close quarters and create distance again using his airbending. Itachi would attempt an Amaterasu, only for it to get bent away by either Aang or Zuko, probably Zuko because his eyes will be open, and Itachi would be forced to try to create an opening. I believe he'd likely do it by using an explosive clone, which Aang should detect with his seismic sense. And eventually, Itachi would catch on to how Aang is seeing and take the fight to the air. Leaping around, using his crows and causing havoc, he would make Aang open his eyes to try to track him. And here is where one of two things happen. Either Itachi forces Aang to make eye contact with him, or Aang enters the Avatar state. And I believe it will be the latter. You see, in the comics, Aang enters the Avatar state regularly and at will, and I don't see a reason why he wouldn't do that here when his first safeguard against Itachi's top-tier Genjutsu fails, and this is where I believe Itachi enters the Susanoo. Peak power versus peak power. Avatar state versus Susanoo. How does this fight play out? I do believe that Aang would launch a barrage of attacks at Itachi, attempting to break through the armor, but to no avail. Itachi would respond by firing the Asaka Magatama beads at Aang, which would be easily dodged, now that Aang has the speed amp granted to him by the Avatar state. Zuko would essentially just be a spectator at this point, as the two Goliaths of this battle duke it out. At some point in the battle, Aang would realize that he needs to use something with a little bit more firepower, put a little more elbow grease into it, if you will. So, it's at this moment that Aang would use the same attack he used against Ozai. He'd charge up all four elements into a spiraling spear, raise it up above his head, dwarfing the Uchiha hideout, and launch it at Itachi, only for it to be deflected by the Yata mirror. The Uchiha hideout would be decimated, and with Kisame defeated and the rest of Team Avatar at his back, Aang would witness the spirit weapons possessed by the Scourge of the Uchiha. As the smoke clears, the rest of Team Avatar would look on as Aang stands before Itachi, the Totsuka Blade running him through. In the chaos of the smoke and rubble, Itachi, being able to see chakra as a color, wouldn't waste an opportunity to land the finishing blow, and Aang's bending wouldn't be able to do anything about it. As Katara screams for Aang and runs toward him, Toph would stomp her foot. The ground around Itachi's feet would raise up and envelop him. Much like Gaara using his sand to pull Madara out of the Susanoo, Toph would be able to attack Itachi from beneath his. And I gotta be honest with you, if Toph knows that Aang has a 30-foot sword stabbing him through the chest, I wouldn't put it past her to literally crush Itachi with the earth, releasing the Totsuka Blade and the Susanoo. They'd run towards Aang and Katara would attempt to heal him, but it would likely be too late. With Aang bleeding out and Team Avatar trying to save him, the fight would come to a sobering end. But then Toph's head would pop up, and she'd tell Team Avatar to look out. Before they could all turn around, another Amaterasu would be launched, catching them all ablaze. Zuko would again be able to bend the flames away, and then they'd turn to face Itachi again, this time with one eye completely blinded. Toph would erect an earth wall and fire it at Itachi to create space. She'd then tell them that based on how he's favoring his right side, she thinks he may have gone blind, maybe sacrificed the sight in his left eye in order to survive. Katara and Zuko would ask how that's possible, but Toph would say she doesn't know, but they need to take him down here and now. Zuko would tell Katara that she needs to focus on Aang, and they'd focus on bringing down Itachi. Zuko and Toph versus Itachi Uchiha. How does this battle play out? Honestly, this is a situation where Toph's metal bending would seal the deal. She'd be able to sense any of the metal on him or in the surrounding area, whether it be his headband or the hundreds of shuriken he carries, manipulate it into whatever form she wants, and use it to deal another finishing blow. She could just take the shuriken that he has in his back pocket and turn them into a giant spike that run him through, or form a cable around him that just splits him apart. I mean, honestly, the Avatar world is lucky that Toph is not a bloodthirsty killer. After finishing him off again, Toph would be on high alert, knowing that he has another eye that he can sacrifice, and surely he'd sacrifice it to give himself another shot at victory. But let's be honest, do we really believe that a fully blind, completely physically exhausted, illness-riddled Itachi, who has never been able to use the Susanoo while not on the ground, where Toph can attack him directly, has a real chance of victory? I personally don't. Maybe Itachi is able to take down one more member of the team using the Izanagi, but he's not sneaking up on Toph with her seismic sense, and she is the bane of his existence here. So, in my opinion, Team Avatar does end up winning this, but not without suffering heavy losses. Aang likely falls, since we have no evidence that Katara can heal a wound like that, and potentially another member falls from the second Izanagi. But at the end of the day, Team Avatar stands victorious, winning this epic battle 10 out of 10 difficulty. In conclusion, Team Avatar was able to take down the Artistic Duo, Immortal Duo, and even the Monster Duo, while suffering severe casualties. But now that Aang is gone, they have no shot against Pain or Obito, and since this is technically kind of Gauntlet style, this is where the video ends. But I will say, I am very interested in doing a video on Team Avatar, with everyone alive of course, versus Pain. I even made a thumbnail for it, but I do have other projects planned, so make sure to let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. Like I said before, if this video gets to 700 likes and 400 comments, I'll have it out next weekend. Also, make sure to let me know what you guys thought of this video. If you enjoyed the video, if you hated it, you know, whatever, let me know. And if you did enjoy yourself here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you never miss out when new content drops. But thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. Have an awesome day.